Much of this semester we're going to be dealing with absolute and relative measures. Time after time after time, these ideas are going to show up. So you want to be able to make sure you get this and get it good. Absolute refers to the actual increase, decrease, or difference from a reference value. And relative refers to the absolute change in comparison to the reference value. What that means is we're going to actually take the answer we got for the absolute value and we're going to divide it by the reference value, and this answer, we're going to want to phrase that answer in terms of percentages. Now, to be able to find the relative value, we need to be able to identify the reference value. Now, in many textbooks, you'll find an entire paragraph devoted to how to identify the reference value in a number of situations. I try to shortcut it a little bit. In this example, we've got Big Burger stock rose from $20 to $25 per share. If I want to talk about how much the stock changed, the fact that it rose tells me that the change is a positive. It was an increase. If that's true, how much did it increase by? It rose from $20 to $25 a share. Big Burger stock rose $5. The absolute change in this case would be a positive $5. And I didn't need a calculator, I didn't need a formula to figure that out. But that doesn't help me figure out the 20 or the 25, which one is the reference value. So what I should do is, if I know my absolute answer should be positive 5, and I find my absolute measure by subtracting, how do I figure out a subtraction with 20 and 25 that'll give me a positive 5 answer? I need the bigger number to come first and the smaller number to come second. And if I do that, 20 minus 25 does give me the correct sign for my absolute answer. My relative is my absolute answer divided by the reference value. Well, if I have set up my subtraction correctly, that is my reference value every time. So I don't have to hem and haw over which one do I divide by. It's always going to be the second one. Look at the formula on your sheet for the absolute difference. Now in my calculator, I do 5 divided by 20 and I get 0.25. That's not my answer because I want to give my answer for the relative in terms of percentages. What if my stock goes the other way? Well, if my stock price drops, that tells me I want my absolute change to be negative to show that the price fell. Again, I know it fell by $5 because the numbers in this problem are so easy. But, so I don't have to think when I find the relative change, write a subtraction so that I end up with a negative 5 answer. My small number would have to come first, and my big number would have to be second. That indicates that 25 is now my reference value. So when I find the relative change, negative 5 divided by 25 is the division I'm going to do. Negative 5 divided by 25 is negative 0.2 or 0.20, which gives me a negative 20%. You want to watch your signs. The signs tell you whether your measurement went up or down. Well, if the absolute measurement went down, the relative measurement also went down. So those two signs are always going to match. They're either both going to be positive or they're both going to be negative. Sometimes the thing that we're talking about changing is a percentage. Percentages can go up and down. Well, how do we handle that? We handle it the same way as we did just regular numbers, but what we change is our vocabulary. The amount that we add or subtract to percents to make them change, we refer to that as percentage points. That is the label that always goes for your absolute change. You only use the percent symbol or the word percent when you have computed the relative change or difference. Now in the past section we were always harping, anytime you're going to use percentages you need to go ahead and change those to decimals to use them in formulas and such. Well, in this instance it's not true. I've got my bank interest has increased from 3% to 4%. So how much has it increased? Well, if I forget the labeling and stuff, it's increased by 1. So that's how I want my answer. It's increased by 1 something. And I told you, if we're talking about the absolute change, it's increased by 1 percentage point. So it's positive 1 because it increased. It's a percentage point because all I did was subtract to get it. Now, how do I set up my subtraction? I don't have to change any decimal places. To get 1, I just need to do 4 minus 3. Which means when I go to do my relative change in my interest rate, I take my answer for the absolute. 3 is going to be my reference value. Change it to a decimal and change it to a percent. Whenever I work with percentages, except for very few cases, isolated instances almost, we're going to round to 1/10 of a percent, so you're going to round your decimal to 3 decimal places. I have a percentage has dropped. If my percentage has dropped, that means my answer needs to be a negative. To get a negative out of the two numbers 20 and 27, I need the 20 to come first. And that doesn't get a percent sign. That gets the label percentage points. To find the relative change, I have my -7. The subtraction implies that 27 is my reference value. And again, that's not going to work out pretty. So I'm going to round it to 3 decimal places. It's -0.259, which gives me a -25.9%. Now, if we're talking about differences instead of changing, what I'm doing is I'm comparing two totally different items. And when I do that, it's not necessarily as clear whether my answer for the absolute comparison should be positive or negative. So we got to do just a tiny bit more thinking to figure out what the reference value is. So if I'm 63 inches tall and my husband is 75 inches tall, I want to compare my height to my husband's. So what I have to think is, when I do me to my husband, what word would I use if I come first? I am taller or I am shorter? Well, I am shorter. Do you think shorter implies a positive or a negative answer? Well, if you phrase it as height, my height is less than my husband's, so that should tell you right there. My absolute difference needs to be negative because I'm the smaller one. So when I do the subtraction, I need to do 63 minus 75 gives me negative 12. This would say I am 12 less than he is. And that would be true. So then we do the relative, and I'm going to take my negative 12. The way that this is phrased, his height is the reference value. So if I divide 12 by 75, that gives me a 0.16, which is negative, and a negative 16%. This says I am 16% shorter than my husband. I kept the information the same. What I did is I reversed the comparison. If I compare my husband to me, that's husband to me, my husband's height is more than my height, or he's taller than me. That implies a positive. So when I do my absolute, he is taller than I am, needs to get a positive answer. And the absolute answer is the same. If I'm a foot shorter than him, he's a foot taller than me. But it does change the reference value. When I go to find the relative difference, we're using my height as the reference, not his. So when I do the division, I'm going to be dividing by the 63 instead of the 75. And that is 0.190, which is 19%. So my husband is 12 inches taller than me, or he's 19% taller than me. Now the last thing that we can kind of compare is we talk a lot about taking measurements. It doesn't matter whether it's money or if it's like measuring the length of a table. There are a lot of errors made when people measure things. So we're going to try to quantify the errors that we make in our measurement. If the labeled weight was 20 pounds and the true weight was 18, well, this one could be a little easier. Your true weight is always going to be your reference, because we're always going to compare things to what it should have been. But what we said before, the kind of reasoning we use, well, it's basically the same. Because if 18 is what it should have been, and I weighed the same package, but I got 20 pounds, if I am trying to quantify my error, I added an extra 2 pounds to the true weight. So if I added weight, my error should be positive, and in this case it would be 2 pounds. So that means I would do 20 minus 18 to get a positive 2 pound error. Again, that makes the true weight the reference. So to find the relative error, I do 2 divided by 18 is 0.111, which is 11.1%. And last but not least, this time I measured short. It's supposed to be that 0.2 centimeters, but I only measured 0.1. If I made the measurement short, I subtracted from the true weight, which means my error should be negative. So I have to take 0.1 minus 0.2 to get a negative. 0.1 is my error. Again, that makes the true measurement, the reference value, So when I go to find the relative error, it's negative 0.1 divided by 0.2, which is 0.5, or 50%. Oh, crap. Writing faster than I'm paying attention. Let's try that again. That's a negative 0.5, which is a negative 50%.